From the Republic Media Network headquarters, it's time for Arnab Goswami on the debate. Arnab Goswami on the debate.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now let me tell you the way I see it. The way I see it, viewers, Ukraine-Russia war, battle, whatever you call it, is on. It'll be on for some time. But as far as America versus Russia is concerned, Russia's already won. And let me tell you why. The fundamental premise with which the Americans got into it, pumped in so much money behind Zelensky, behind Ukraine, billions of dollars, bankrolled Ukraine, put in all kinds of sanctions on Russia, seized Russians' assets, almost $500 billion, was basically to isolate Russia. The idea was to teach Russia a lesson and make an example of that to the rest of the world, that if Russia stepped out of line, it would be put in place by isolating it. The rest of the world would come together. And that is principally, essentially, what has been going on, what the Americans entered this. And this is why the battle has been on for more than 2 years. And as far as that is concerned, my view is that Putin has won because the Americans have completely failed to isolate Russia. This BRICS Summit 2024 is a sharp contrast to last year's BRICS Summit. Last year, I remember the BRICS Summit, there was Vladimir Putin participating on one side of a video screen, unable to attend in person due to an arrest warrant from an international criminal court for alleged war crimes over Ukraine. And look at how things have changed right now. This time, more than a dozen significant world leaders are attending the BRICS inauguration ceremony. This includes Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Chinese President Xi Jinping, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, Egyptian President El-Sisi, and Ethiopian President Abiy Ahmed, among others. Not just that, this is almost half the world's population being represented this time. This is 45% of the world's population, ladies and gentlemen. Their economies together are a staggering close to $30 trillion. The main interest the Russians have, along with the Chinese, is breaking the dominance of the US dollar. That may not happen this time, but the fact is that Russia is seeing an upswing in terms of its global activity. It's been 3 years that America has been trying to isolate Russia. And the one message that comes out of this BRICS summit, after Russia has defied 16,500 American sanctions, basically aimed at crippling its economy, it continues to be the third largest arms exporter in the world. And they're going to spend $145 billion in defense expenditure, spending 7% of their GDP almost on defense. Viewers, if after all of this, the Americans don't get a message that they have lost. And that's the story that I want to lead with tonight. The fact is, the American spin masters can put it any which way. But if the intent was to cripple Russia by isolating Russia, you have not crippled Russia, Americans. You've not been able to isolate Russia. I'm not getting into the merits of what the Russian position, American position are. The fact is, in terms of pure grand strategy, the grand strategy of the Americans was to isolate Putin and isolate Russia, and hence teach a lesson that would go beyond Russia. In that, they have abysmally, completely, disastrously, ladies and gentlemen, failed this time. As Putin takes part in an emerging coalition of world leaders standing with him, I'm not saying behind him, but standing with him, the American attempt to isolate Russia from the global stage has come to an end. And with that, a change in the world order. The world order is shifting. A new world order is speaking. Russian isolation is ending. That's where the story is, and that's where the rest of the story will now begin. Let's debate.
The optics couldn't have been better. With 5 new members and 32 other nations wanting to join BRICS, Russia's apparent geopolitical isolation is all but over. Since the start of the Ukraine war in 2022, Russia has faced Western ire, President Putin even getting arrest warrants.
Erstens, die Ukraine kann sich auf uns verlassen. Zweitens ist es eine klare Botschaft an Putin. Ein Spiel auf Zeit wird nicht funktionieren. Wir werden in unserer Unterstützung für die Ukraine nicht nachlassen.
Putin has the gall to say he's denazifying Ukraine. It's a lie. It's just cynical. He knows that. And it's also obscene. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Despite all this criticism, diplomatic rush hour in Kazan, venue of the 16th BRICS Leaders Summit, shows how strongly multipolar the world has become, with Russia still holding forth. As possibly the only truly non-aligned nation which is heard on both the sides, this is also the moment for India and Prime Minister Modi under the sun to be showcasing our position as a major geopolitical pole. Be it the key pre-opening bilateral with President Putin, or the acknowledgement from Putin himself to Giorgia Meloni of Italy that Prime Minister Modi can play a crucial role in peace in Europe. Both the global north and the global south indeed seem to be turning to India. However, the US was quick to put out its veiled stance on the BRICS Summit 2024, playing down the significance. But with all the action at the BRICS Summit in Kazan, has the West now realized that eliminating Russia from the global stage remains nearly impossible in today's global order.
Let's look at this in terms of geopolitical communication strategy. Sushant Sareen from Delhi, Konstantin Krylov is Secretary General of the Eurasian Chapter of the Universal Peace Federation from Moscow. Pelman Grigory is Co-Chairman of One Future Business and Cultural International Forum from Moscow. And we have communication strategist Anang Mittal joining us from Washington. Anang, has America failed? I mean, it's time for them to acknowledge the whole idea to isolate Russia has not gone anywhere.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't think America has failed. I think the longer geostrategic implications of the Ukraine war and the continuing sanctions are still to play out. But I do think that it's very obvious that, as you said, since the last BRICS summit, that Mr. Putin is not going away anytime soon, and neither is Mr. Xi. So I think we have to look at this BRICS summit, and especially Prime Minister Modi's appearance there, the various agreements that he's been talking about that have been hinted at as a sign of India's strategic independence. And I think America, with the tensions that America's had with India, this Canada controversy, I think it's very clear that American pressure is simply not, as strong as it was during the post-Cold War era or even during the Cold War. And I think Americans have to own up to that. The American foreign policy has to own up to that and simply agree to it. And I think some of the folks in Biden's cabinet are pretty aware of it, even though they may not want to admit it. But I do think that America, is going to continue to place pressure on all the countries and is going to continue to pursue its own foreign policy, its own interest. But it has to understand that other countries are also going to pursue their own interests, and that those do not necessarily align all the time, 100%, with America. So certainly, Mr. Modi being there, shaking hands with Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin, is going to provide that answer, is going to provide that image that, yes, India and China don't see eye to eye. Maybe India and Russia sometimes don't see eye to eye, but they're certainly not going to be this sort of, I'm only friends with one person and I'm only friends with one side. As you said, we're entering into the multipolar world, and that just America is just going to have to sit back and swallow that reality.
I mean, the Americans can't say now that we are too busy with the elections to look at what's going on in BRICS. I can tell you all eyes are on BRICS. How is this being positioned in Moscow internally? How is Putin positioning this? Konstantin, can you tell us more about that? How is Putin positioning this BRICS summit?
BRICS Summit is very important for Russia and for the Russian people. And this summit is more than economy, more than politics. It's really about brotherhood, because it's not that all the nations coming to Russia are supporting or agreeing with what Russia is doing. However, they all express brotherly unity and they can talk to each other. So really, I see the emergence of BRICS is not as rivalry to the United States, but as an attempt to mend the mistakes that occurred after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States triumphalism over that collapse, and the lacking issues in the United Nations as well. So if BRICS really develops well, then all those issues can be gone, and that could be a good unity. So it's not about winning over someone, but it's a win-win that is expected. This is how I see it from Moscow.
Well, absolutely. Sushant, there's a bilateral between Putin and Xi Jinping, and there's a bilateral between Modi and Xi Jinping tomorrow, following the bilateral between Modi and Putin today, right? There were two parts of what was going on for the last 2 years: a diplomatic war to isolate Russia, and then the military conflict. Would you say the diplomatic war is now all but over for America?
Well, in some ways it is over, because frankly, it was a silly thing to even think that they could isolate a country like Russia. Now, even though diminished, Russia remains a great power. And how do you isolate a great power? You can't do it. And if Russia had nothing in its stock, then maybe it might have still been possible. But Russia is a superpower when it comes to energy supplies, its defense industry, in a range of other fields. Russia is a very powerful country. So how do you actually isolate a country which has a global footprint? I think the Americans should have sensed that and should not have gone down that road. Secondly, even as far as the war is concerned, I can understand Western and American and some of the other countries, their concerns, their anger with Russia for the war in Ukraine. Perhaps one can understand it, one can even explain it. But the fact is that trying to continuously agitate this war, trying to prolong it, I don't know how much sense it makes. Maybe they should have used their diplomatic capital to try and bring this war to an end, or at least some kind of a ceasefire taking place, so that the kind of casualties and the destruction which we have seen was not going to happen. But unfortunately, I think it then translates into a kind of a proxy war. A dead Ukrainian works well for the West. The Ukrainians are, in a manner of speaking, fighting their war for them against Russia. And why would they want to fight against Russia? There is no clarity. Why would they want to kind of continuously finger Russia? No clarity on that. But they wanted to do it. It is almost like they wanted a conflict like this to emerge, which simply didn't make any sense. Now look, the other problem with the West really, and which is the most galling thing, I can understand a country which has an Idi Amin, who's carrying out massacres and genocide, or a Pol Pot or somebody like that. But you want to have every country under your thumb because you don't agree with their system, you don't agree with their democracy. But when it comes to Pakistan, where there has been a wholesale theft of an election, you think it's still a democratic country. When it comes to other countries like, say, Egypt or some of the other countries, you have no compunctions in dealing with their rulers or their regimes or their governments. But when it comes to Russia, you want to continuously finger it, you want to undermine it. I don't know what strategic sense there was in doing this and then pushing the Russians into the open and waiting arms of the Chinese. You are having
it's a mess. It's a mess.
The Chinese, and you push the Russians in the Chinese camp. I don't know what strategic myopia was guiding the so-called great strategists.
No, there is no strategy. I'm sorry to intervene there, Sushant, but My own view is that we have overestimated American foreign policy. There is no strategy. It is all being run by the American deep state. Biden has been a puppet president. He's going and Putin's becoming stronger. And he's going, and there's a horrifying thought for some people who follow foreign policy that Kamala Harris will come in. But, internally in America also, Trump is going to go around strutting, saying, I told you so, you messed up. If I had been in charge, I would have solved this issue instead of pumping hundreds of billions behind Zelensky, who's unstable. The situation is extremely serious. Now, before I go back to Washington, I want to go to Pelman Grigori from Moscow. We are also hearing here, Mr. Grigori, that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres will also be visiting, where he could also have a bilateral with Vladimir Putin. If there is a meeting between the UN Secretary General and Putin as well, besides 20 bilateral meetings that Putin will have with different world leaders, what is the message you think which will go out globally?
Yes, I think it's a very important message to all over the world, not only for the global south, that political situation and the wishes for the new order is very, very strong in position now. And even Secretary General of United Nations came to this summit just to talk with Mr. Putin to see what is going on. So I think it's absolutely a new situation worldwide. And this new situation must be taken in consideration of actual not only diplomacy, global diplomacy, not only in a global south and collective west, but also all over the world. And this is a really very important event based not only on a friendly position, but it's based on absolutely different principles and different values. It was a very interesting mention by Mr. Putin several days ago on a business forum what took place in Moscow. And this message was correspondent to Mr. Modi, that BRICS is not against West. BRICS is just not a West. It's based on the different values, on common values of different countries who joined this unity association. It's open association. Nobody wants to dominate there. It's mostly based on a bilateral friendship and bilateral cooperation between two countries. And you can see that this new form of association can accept even countries from different political and military unions, from different economical systems. And it's really absolutely new in our history, in our civilization. And I think it's a very good lighthouse for everybody in the world, how we need to change the world in the future on a open-based, not try to dominate on anybody and try to be friendly with everybody.
Yeah.
And what is the most important is just to find trust to each other. This is the most basic platform, what is necessary to go forward on diplomacy.
I think this is the biggest, I mean, maybe not military, biggest setback for America since Vietnam, without doubt. I think Joseph Chalil, I think the Americans are going to have to come to terms with it for a long time. And I don't think the American media is telling them the real story that they've lost. Essentially, I look upon the BRICS Summit, the presence of the UN Secretary General, the presence of Narendra Modi, Xi Jinping, the presence of all these world leaders, the Global South backing Russia, and economic and defense cooperation between them becoming stronger. In fact, the West has lost Russia as a market, and Russian economy is outpacing Europe. The Russian economy is growing faster than the US. The World Bank has just declared Russia a high-income economy. Their industry has rebounded. Their unemployment rate has gone down. So Russia has really done well. And you can only see what's happening to Europe and what's happening to America. I mean, it's been a mistake. Can there be any pulling back Can there be any pulling back for America now? Or will that have to wait till after the results of the elections?
In 3 weeks, you will know the results. I mean, November 5th, you will see the election results. What's been happening is, for the past 4 years, the weak U.S. leadership had empowered the deep state to become more powerful. And you just have to follow the money. Who's benefiting from all these conflicts? From whether the Israeli conflict in the Middle East, or is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, money of the industrial defense industrial complex in the U.S. Most of the industries in the U.S. are privatized. Most of the companies which make guns and and armaments and flights and missiles and even missile defense systems, all privatized American corporations, and their main interest is keeping the conflict alive. So looks like they will lose if a strong leadership comes in and put an end to this and bring in world peace. So unfortunately, a weak President Biden had let an upper hand to this defense industrial complex. I remember 20 years ago, the Republican Party was a pro-war party in the U.S. Now that's completely changed. Now Kamala Harris and the Democrats are the pro-war party. They don't want peace. There's
going to be no support for them. No. But Joseph, on that, I just want to throw again to Mr. Mittal. They can't. This is terrible news for them at this stage of the election, for the whole Obama-Kamala Harris campaign, because Trump and Trump supporters are going to say, you lost. You embarrassed America. And this is going to go wildly against them. Anand.
That's right. And you have to remember that the Obama-Biden policy of 2008 till 2012 was to approach rapprochement with Russia, to be friendly to Russia, to say that Russia was not a problem. Mr. Obama famously in the 2012 election said, this is a Cold War mentality, that Russia is our enemy. So I think the double dealing, the hypocrisy, the double standard is certainly there. It's certainly something that has not escaped the American viewers, the American audience, and the American voters. And I think that's going to continue in this election. I think most likely what you're going to see if Mr. Trump is elected is going to be a change in the views that the American foreign policy views are going to change. But I'm not sure if that's going to end the Ukraine war, but it's certainly going to make the right moves towards a more peaceful negotiation, possibly the right moves towards even being more friendly to India. If BRICS is the new a thing in town, then Mr. Trump is certainly going to want to make a deal. He loves to make deals. He loves to do bilateral. So he will certainly ratchet up his foreign policy, his diplomacy, to make sure that India doesn't fully fall into the Russia-China sphere. And I think that's understandable. And I think, like I said,
are Americans seeing this?
Anand,
are Americans seeing this? Is the American media even covering this, or are they downplaying it? Or are they trying to say nothing's happening? Do the American people realize they just lost at the global stage? Do they even realize that?
No, I don't think so. I think the American media is certainly not going to be playing this. It's playing up more on social media, where a lot of Americans now are getting their news. And I think this is, again, why when Mr. Modi was here in September, the New York Times sent their the smallest of correspondents with the very small portfolio, not the national security correspondent. So, the American media kind of has blinders on about these things. And so most likely the place where you're going to see a lot more of this kind of engagement and understanding is going to be on social media.
No, but it will go out. It will go out. I think that's why Russia today was also banned, because they realized the Americans don't want the news to go out that they lost. Konstantin, what's the PR machinery of Russia going to do at the end of the BRICS Summit? I'm sure they're also going to be working overtime now.
Russia is looking for friends, and if BRICS grows, more friends will join. But I want also to make sure that we all understand that Russian government and Russian people don't see the United States as the eternal enemy of Russia. Russia actually borders with the United States through the Bering Strait. And until today, Russia is building the railway towards that border. And in addition, the Russian government, until very recently, was developing a plan of building a tunnel through Bering Strait to connect Russia and the United States. So this situation, everybody understands, this situation is temporary, but on a global scale, Russia and US are partners forever.
That's a very important statement.
People don't see America as an enemy.
Very important statement. Pelman, you want to comment on that, Grigory? Could things completely change?
I think it's a really very important statement that American people, Russian people are really friendly, and it's a temporary situation and not permanent to go forward. And I think really it's very important to go forward on the way of BRICS, to continue all this community, to increase this community, and at the same time to develop the trust, and trust not only inside the global south, but a trust also with the Western countries, with the collective West.
Very interesting.
And
I think all the words I'm hearing tonight, show a beginning of a long period, or maybe a short period of major change. Sushant, the setting is all right. The only thing that's uncertain is the American election. So all of this, then the result of the American election, Trump comes in, and we could have a very different end to the year. Very different end to the year. But what happens if Kamala comes in?
I don't know. Joseph was very confident that the result we'll know on November 5th. But if American elections are anything to go by, you might not know the results ever, because or it might take weeks, maybe months, court cases. It's a broken election system. There are the kind of allegations we used to hear in India in the 1970s and 80s, when you still had, the ballot boxes and stuff like that, and you had booth capturing and fake voting and stuff like that. That's the United States today. Imagine this is supposedly the superpower, the hyperpower of the world. And they can't run an election. Their election machinery is broken. The electoral system is broken. So I don't know. Let's hope that they can throw up a result on 5th of November. And it's a result which everyone accepts. For example, in India, regardless of whether you like the outcome of an election or not, everybody accepts the result, and you move forward. In the United States, nobody accepts the result anymore. It's more like Pakistan now.
Oh, well, let's see. The problem also
is budget, but on a more substantive note, I heard some very optimistic noises from our Russian friends out here. I'm afraid I'm not as optimistic as they are. That might be the Russian position, that they don't see either people in Europe or in the United States as their enemy, and probably it is the Russian position. I'm not so confident whether that's the position in the United States and in Europe. In large parts of Western Europe, they look at, even though their countries are being destroyed from inside through migration and all sorts of other things, they still consider the greatest existential threat to them coming from Russia. The same is the case with the Americans, that once they've declared someone their enemy, regardless of the fact that for almost 20 odd years, even longer, they had reasonably good relations with Russia. But the moment any state starts exercising a degree of autonomy, of action, I think that pisses off the Americans. They cannot handle it. They want a country to be subservient. They want a country to be entirely obsequious to them. And one of the reasons why we see the kind of new fronts that have been opened up against India, whether it's in relation to Bangladesh, what's happened out there, whether it's on this whole Khalistani issue, which they seem to be pandering and sponsoring and supporting, it is because they think that India is not obedient enough. India is not being obsequious to them. India is not listening to them. India is keeping autonomy, of action in its store. And that's something they don't want.
They'll have to change the way, Sushant, they look at things.
Plus to sit, we should sit.
Yeah, they'll have to change the way they look at things. For me, the bigger...
Arnab, come on. Look, it takes a long time for an imperial power, which in some ways the United States is, to understand that...
So I take your point.
When the Zamidar's serf becomes the IAS officer in India, the Zamidar can't handle it.
I tell you here, Americans will have to understand nobody is their serf. But I'll tell you the real problem in America. The real problem in America is that they have become insular. they know more about Taylor Swift than what is happening in the rest of the world. That is America's problem. They are not engaged with the rest of the world. And I think when half the world's population comes together in Kazan and are holding hands together, and America is not invited to the party, then the Americans need to make this a subject of their political debate. I thank you all. We're watching very closely, eagerly to Narendra Modi's bilateral with Xi Jinping. That's tomorrow, and we'll be live on that. Viewers, for the biggest breaking news stories from India and around the world, it is only and only and only Republic. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.